Hey, everybody. Welcome to Beyond Local Podcast, episode 34. We got a crowded room today. Very exciting. Special edition, higher education and digital marketing. So with me today, as usual, is Mark Diamond, our Director of Paid Media. Thanks for joining me once again, Mark.
Hey, everyone.
All right. Also with me today, Sean Daney from Alcon Printing, a partner here at LSEO. This is the first time with us. Sean, you brought a lot of friends with you this time.
I did. In fact, guys, bear with me. I'm going to read this because I don't want to get any of the titles wrong. But so today we have three panelists from various institutions. Jennifer Umberger is joining us from Bloomsburg University, and Jennifer is the Associate Vice President and Chief Marketing and Communications Officer at Bloomsburg. We also have Shane Baglini, and Shane comes to us from Lehigh Carbon Community College, and he is the Director of Marketing and Publications at Lehigh Carbon Community College. And Matthew Bieber, who is from Alvernia University. He is the Senior Associate Director of Digital. Welcome, guys. Thanks for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Just a quick thing before you start, too. Anybody that's listening, I'm going to do this a lot, by the way, so be prepared for these interruptions. Can't help myself. But if anybody wants any detailed information about any of the guests on the show, that is available on the LSEO podcast website. We'll share that link when we stream the episode.
That's correct. All their full bios are right there. That's great. Thank you for that, Sean. All right. So, as we know, the pandemic, COVID-19, has impacted a lot of organizations, a lot of industries, a lot of different businesses. Of course, one of those being higher education. And it has impacted a lot of different industries in a lot of different ways. And in higher education, some of the things that it impacted was the way that they learn. So moving into more of a hybrid learning environment, some in the classroom, some at home, so on and so forth. Student housing, so not as many students being on campus. That has been impacted. Fundraising, of course, has been impacting, and enrollment challenges. So we know there have been enrollment issues for a period of time, but the pandemic has really focused on driven down some of the enrollment percentages in 2020. And some of the stats we have here is enrollment rates have dropped by 15%. So instead of talking about the hybrid learning and all the other stuff, the other impacts, because we could be here for a long period of time, we're really going to focus on the enrollment challenges that higher education has faced, over the past year. So with that in mind, I'd like to start with Matt, if that's okay with you. What would you say was the biggest marketing challenge you overcame in 2020?
Yeah, thank you. So I think first, just to second what you're saying is that COVID was really the accelerant. These challenges have been in play, stretching back 10 years. And, we're probably going to continue to have these challenges once COVID's over. But the one thing that I learned, that we really learned here at Alvernia, is that we had to treat our funnel differently. So where we were focusing on the top of the funnel and awareness and getting more prospects into the pipeline, the things that we were doing from a traditional perspective, from a geofencing perspective, they weren't going to work once COVID came into play because individuals weren't in those locations that we were targeting with our advertising. So it was tougher to get people in the funnel. So we had to shift farther down, and we had to really focus on the individuals already in the funnel and make them feel valued and make them feel like they wanted to be at Alvernia, that they could see themselves at Alvernia. So in the past, Alvernia marketing and admissions were kind of siloed operations, and we've become much more integrated and nimble because of COVID, and we're focusing more on those high value prospects that are already in the funnel as opposed to trying to pull more in. Now, we absolutely want more in the funnel, but we realize we got to make sure we work with what we have first.
Great. Thank you for that. And that's probably part of your 2021 strategy going forward.
Oh, absolutely. I've always considered myself a full funnel marketer, and COVID has really given me the opportunity to stretch in that regard.
Awesome. Thank you. So now I would like to turn it over to Jennifer. Jennifer, what was your biggest challenge in 2020?
Well, we had similar challenges as Matt outlined. And so what I'll add is something maybe a little bit different. For those of us that are campus-based marketers, a lot of our time is actually split between the enrollment marketing activities and covering campus events. So one of the things that actually worked in our favor during this time was sort of the positive impact to our workflow. Starting last April, we began our process of developing a new institutional website. And so selfishly, COVID actually gave us back some focused time, really to be able to dedicate to that project. Additionally, I would say we were able to improve efficiencies, Zoom being one of those that between that and Teams and some of the other ways that we're connecting now that some of us are still remote at certain times, really helped us to connect with our client base in a different way, and even in a more meaningful way. So tightening up those cross-campus collaborations and things really has been a positive outcome of COVID.
Perfect.
It's amazing. If I can, I know we want to turn this over to Shane as well, but what's interesting about that, Jen, is it's sort of a similar thing. You know, like I had thought to myself, you know, in the era of COVID, you know, how will that affect communications with clients and whatnot? But I have found a similar thing, that tools such as this that enable us to have this conversation today, I'm actually finding more access to those conversations than I had previously to that. So I think it's really interesting to see how technology has really come into play to kind of fill that gap. And I guess the question that I would have as a bit of a follow-up to it is, you know, obviously there's a lack of events, right, as a result of some of the restrictions around COVID. So have you found those tools that you mentioned to help sort of fill that void around the lack of event type activities?
We have, to an extent. Throughout the fall semester, I know our student involvement and campus life areas really did focus a lot on Zoom and some of the really fun tools to be able to connect our students in virtual ways. And so whether those were, you know, virtual trivia nights or, you know, some fun different events of a similar nature, that did help, because one of the populations we were most concerned with making sure they felt connected after they had been so personally recruited through the process was our first year students. So it was really important that they still get the chance to connect with people in person, albeit socially distanced, but making sure that they were connecting with classmates and working within their residence hall groups and finding good ways to connect with their faculty as well.
Amazing. It's funny. I think about orientation and the role that just those orientation events played for me. You know, it's amazing that there's still opportunities to do that.
Right. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And if I could just jump in, because we saw similar things that Jennifer's speaking about. We ran probably 300 virtual events for prospective and current students to make sure that they were connected to campus, to make sure that they felt valued. And while the attendance numbers at those events may not have been huge, the relationship building that happened at those events was huge. And I don't see that as something that's going away. That's probably going to stick even past COVID, is virtual events.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Shane, anything to add as far as biggest challenges or you know, your 2021 strategy that maybe wasn't covered?
Yeah, so for us at the community college level, it's kind of twofold, the challenges. The first challenge is typically in community college enrollment, when the economy declines, or, you know, specifically employment, community college enrollment rises, goes up, and that's not the case this time around. And so the biggest challenge between ourselves and admissions and enrollment has been understanding and trying to figure out why that is. You know, obviously there's trepidation among high school students and certainly returning adults that they're not certain what's happening. They're not, you know, they don't know if they can handle an online class. They don't know if they want to do an online class. So we've kind of found out that the on-campus experience of a community college is a little bit more important than we realized. And then the second biggest challenge from my seat and our office here is communicating that uncertainty to prospective students and current students. I was just on a meeting this morning with admissions, and we don't know even now what percentage of classes will be held on campus, what those classes will be. We've had, people on campus here and there for things like nursing and manufacturing and hands-on courses, but really the uncertainty, even still, it has been the biggest challenge of being able to tell students this is what's happening, because we don't know. So, the point about the 2021 strategy is kind of what Matt touched on a second ago, is to kind of continue to enhance those virtual touch points, the virtual events. We're holding virtual open houses, and we're just giving people more options, rather than relying on 2 big open house events throughout the year. We've needed to adapt and up that number to double digits. So those have been the challenges, but they've led to some good innovation.
It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're all becoming Zoom and virtual experts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I read an interesting article sort of in preparation to this that talked a little bit about like how nowadays, how we're communicating, or how institutions are communicating to prospective students and students on campus and remote, and just how there's this need for transparency and communication has never been more critical. And that sort of article sort of led into how you can utilize social media to be reaching those audiences. And I think actually that's sort of what we're getting to next.
Right. I mean, social media was huge, prior to COVID, obviously, but the impact COVID had on social media was phenomenal.
Yeah.
44% of the world is now using social media, up from when they started before COVID.
It's an increase. It's insane.
Yeah.
And I'm not surprised by that, because I sit at the dinner table and I look at my sons, every single one of them is glued to a device. It makes me crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But right now too, I think because of this, there's this isolation effect that there's only so much for them to do. And I find that it's driving them more toward, they have to do it for school,
Mm-hmm.
but beyond that, they're utilizing it to communicate with friends that they can't see on the day-to-day.
Yeah, and my kids are using 2 devices at once, one to play, one to communicate, but when we were putting this information together, you did a little bit more research and came up with some more interesting statistics.
I did. Yeah. And it's funny because I'm like an over prepper for things like this. So like I was diving into all kinds of data around higher ed marketing trends. And what I found most interesting, I actually found from a national retail organization, because I was really trying to understand usage around social media channels. And I know it's kind of a broad topic because a lot of it has to do really with what your demographic is. So for this, and you guys can obviously, our guests can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I was really kind of looking for Gen Z data just based on the age group. And so one that I had found from, like I said, it was a retail organization of some sort that did this particular study. They talked about usage. And the one I thought was shocking was that Snapchat, for example. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, I'm using those Snapchat filters on the daily. I can't help myself. I'm into that kind of stuff. But I really don't engage with brands on that particular channel. I do on Instagram. I do on Facebook. There are channels that I'm actively engaging with brands. And Snap I found was shocking because out of 83% usage of the channel, it only had 7% brand engagement. And so it really got me thinking about how that would affect organizations and institutions on how they plan their ad campaigns and whether a channel has value. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we there's so many different ways to reach that demographic. You mentioned Snapchat, Facebook. There's Twitter, there's Pinterest, there's all different types of things out there. There's so many.
I'm TikToking.
Right. Yeah. But let's throw it up to the panel, and I'll ask Jennifer, like, what are you using to engage your on-campus students and some of your remote students and maybe prospective students?
Well, quite literally, Zoom has been one of those key elements. Same thing actually with Facebook Live. While overwhelmingly our prospective students say that they prefer and spend more time on Instagram and Snapchat, they are more than willing to engage with us in video format through Facebook. So it's been an opportunity for us to continue that level of personalization, as Matt had alluded to earlier, that really has been incredibly helpful for us. It's not always easy to kind of get out of our mindsets of here are your options as far as the majors we offer, and to focus even more on storytelling about how do you combine a major with a minor with an internship experience in order to really craft that program that sets you up for these future career paths that often don't exist yet. So it's exciting to be able to use that. Text messaging in terms of some of the functional needs has really been something we've had to embrace even more so than before, especially for current students. We're also spending a lot of our time for current students focused on developing almost digest newsletters for them weekly. We've been assessing the volume of emails that they're getting from offices across our campus, combined with our weekly COVID updates, combined with planning for each semester. And we really have developed something of value to them that really aggregates all of that information in one location that they know will hit their inboxes twice a week.
Yeah, that's amazing. In fact, I'm taking all kind of notes about this because this is what I love so much about these formats and these conversations, because, you know, I'm diving into data, looking at these specific platforms. You know, Jen's identifying Zoom, Facebook Live, which is a bit of a variant for, you know, you're not necessarily talking about Facebook, you know, text messaging in these newsletters. I mean, these are things that aren't really, in my research, things that are really out there being talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see that it's adding huge value at Bloom. You know, so this is why I think, you know, that's going to resonate with someone that's listening to this. You know, it's going to give them a little idea or a nugget to take and to put in place. I'm sorry, Jen, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead. I was going to add just a brief summary too. When it comes to the paid advertising side of things, unlike some other competitor institutions, we actually did not take our foot off the gas pedal with advertising at all during COVID.
Okay.
So our buy stayed in the same place budgetarily as when we began the year. However, we've taken the chance to actually explore some different platforms that are reaching them, maybe even more so in video, as well as some other areas where they're spending time. And since you mentioned data, one really interesting data point that we've noticed, especially with our admissions communications, is that unlike years prior, the prevalence of them interacting with our website or emails through a desktop computer has grown significantly. So where in prior years about 80% of the interactions were happening from a mobile phone, that's down almost to 60% in some cases. So that's been a really interesting thing that we've wanted to capture in terms of even some of our ad spend on mobile delivered advertisements, as well as those that would be delivered more to the desktop.
Just so I want to make sure that I understand this, right? You said 60% decline in mobile.
No, from 80% to 60%.
Oh, okay, so it wasn't a 20% decline. Okay, great. That's what I was curious. Still though, I mean, a huge number, and I will say I'm shocked. I mean, I find that very surprising. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah. Although Zoom School, I think, can be focused on a lot of that.
Yeah, true.
So, Jennifer, you touched on a couple of things there about your budget not changing, kept a foot on the gas, but exploring other channels. Can you elaborate on maybe some of the different channels that you explored during this period?
Sure. We had done some event driving terrestrial radio in the past, and we really shifted that to a digital radio platform. Definitely trying to explore some new functionality with the ability to not only geo-target our prospects, but even more so with areas that they may or may not be interested in. Our remarketing campaign is working far better this year because we do have a new admissions microsite, which is phase 1 of that full website redesign I mentioned. And so we've been able to employ some different tactics this year that are giving us a better indication of where and how and when users are interacting with our ads. But we're also doing YouTube, Instagram, pre-roll video, whether that's Hulu or other platforms. Still exploring print. It still adds value to have an item
Amen.
that hits the kitchen table. So, you know, we absolutely are looking at that, and looking at some TikTok or Snapchat items leading into the fall yield or spring yield season.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to get Shane's take too.
That's
on
where I
it.
was just
Yeah,
going to go.
that's-
Like, you know, are there any other channels that you're exploring or, you know, doing anything different?
Yeah, we actually are in the process of launching TikTok, and we're one of the struggles. One of the other struggles has been no students on campus, so there's no ability to do a student takeover or something like that. So we're working with some of our admissions and faculty to identify students that might be good ambassadors. And I think we've got something pretty cool in the works with our aviation program coming up, which I'm excited about. But yeah, I mean, the big three, so to speak, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter are our main drivers, but we're using them differently. We've been focused, especially with our current students, on kind of understanding that we're here for them. So we actually launched a campaign over the summer called Mental Health Minutes. And so we had one of our mental health counselors on campus do a series of videos about, how coping with stress, anxiety, pandemic related things, and then the resources available on campus to kind of let students know we're here for you. And we're here to talk if you need us, even if you can't see us in person. But in terms of our paid ad strategy, similar to Jennifer, we've kind of upped the ante a little bit. We've ended up taking some traditional platforms that we were using, some of our outdoor advertising, and shifted that into more digital, because there's fewer people on the road to see those billboards, first of all, and second of all, we can be much more granular in how we're targeting people, especially through Facebook and social media, but also our Google ad approach. So our platforms haven't changed much. Again, one of the other challenges is not being able to do as much video as we would like with nobody really here, but we were able to do things like a campus walkthrough and things like that to kind of stem the tide, so to speak.
Great. Thank you. You mentioned Google as, running ads on there. Do you explore any of the other search engines, Microsoft, DuckDuckGo, or do you mainly focus on Google?
Mainly Google, but we do have a little bit of Microsoft as well.
So,
It's interesting. Matt and I talked a little bit about that the other day. Matt, I think we were talking a little bit about privacy concerns around, and the effect that they would have in paid search. I'd like to actually get your take on that. But before we do that, if you can, I'd like to get your input too, because I know that you are a paid ad guy. So I'm interested to hear what you have to say as well.
So it's real interesting that both Jen and Shane kept their foot on the gas during COVID, and we did the same thing. And it also gave us the opportunity to experiment. So we got into OTT, we got a lot more into addressable, but what I started to rely on, what I'm going to rely on very heavily going forward, is first-party data. So, and this goes back to speaking to working what's already in the funnel when it comes to paid advertising and paid social advertising. Spotify, from a digital radio perspective, has also been a platform that we've been experimenting a lot in. But as far as paid, Sean, we talked about this the other day. So like Shane, I have some spend in Bing. And then by extension, I probably have some spend in DuckDuckGo. But really, my focus is still Google, even with privacy concerns. And we talked about this. So the analytics, the audience, where my audience is going to tell me where I need to be spending my money as far as paid search ads. And right now, I'm not seeing a shift. Could there be a shift going forward? It's possible. I forget what that number is, Sean, if you could remind me, that DuckDuckGo hit the other day as far as searches. So it's interesting, but I wonder if it's going to come full circle with privacy controls that Google's rolling out, including Flock, which I know that we're talking about later. Is that going to be enough to stem the tide? You know, and will my mix need to change, or is it going to stay the way that it's been for the last couple of years? I don't know, but I'll tell you, I'm going to let my analytics, I'm going to let what the data says guide me from where I go from that perspective.
Matt, I have a quick question on that. Do you have a feeling that maybe in terms of your audience segmentation that you'll see a more significant shift of maybe our parent audience moving to something like Bing or DuckDuckGo as opposed to the students?
So I think for the most part, when I'm in paid, I'm focusing on adult students. I'm focusing on parents. I don't know necessarily that we're seeing the ROI on undergraduate students. I take the same approach when I'm looking at Facebook too. I'm not thinking about the 16, 17, and 18-year-old. I'm thinking about the parent with a 16, 17, or 18-year-old. Honestly, I don't know. I'm gonna let my data tell me where it's gonna go in the future. And I kind of think if it's a parent, I'm also thinking about what browser are they using? What search engine are they using at work? Because that's likely where they're searching for this information for their student when they have 5 to 10 minute break, and is, you know, manufacturing company XYZ or the other business down the street. Do they have Google or Bing set up on their computers, or do they have DuckDuckGo? My guess is that they have Google or Bing set up.
Yeah, it's interesting. And just to answer what you had mentioned earlier, Matt, you had asked about those searches, the daily searches with DuckDuckGo. And that's the reason why I had asked you that question the other day, because I had seen that DuckDuckGo hit 100 million, I think is the number, right?
Yeah, daily.
Yeah, 100 million daily searches. You know, now me personally, I actually don't like the results that I get. The experience I have in DuckDuckGo, I don't love. I prefer Google. But it kind of gets us down. And Matt, actually, you had brought up Flock in our conversation the other day, and I had spoken to Mark here about it on the LSEO team. That's really kind of his alley all day long. But Mark actually also did was a podcast. This was this week on iOS privacy related concerns, correct?
And everything related to Facebook. Yep.
Right. So if you can, maybe just for those that are listening that may not know what Flock is when we say it, you can give a little bit of a background of what that is and maybe why it maybe matters.
Definitely. One step backward from that before we even get there is, you know, we're seeing this huge shift from privacy versus ad targeting, right? So on the Facebook side, which was last week, just a really quick recap with iOS 14, when someone downloads an app on their phone now on iPhone, like Facebook, for example, iOS 14 is literally going to tell them, hey, Facebook's going to track whatever it's going to track. It's pixel based. It's going through your contacts. It's going through your messages, like whatever. It's literally going to tell you that. And then it's going to ask, do you want to be tracked? Yes or no? Maybe not that exact phrasing, but
Sure.
It's literally asking for the opt-in. So on the Facebook side, that's really hurting them. And they've had to switch to like a domain verification and limiting the pixel in that way. This is the version that Google's going after. So on the search side, that's what Flock has to deal with is again, privacy. And really what it deals with is right now Google is basically a one-to-one. Like we're able to see someone searches for something. We're able to see that they click on our ad. We're able to see that they made a phone call or filled out a form, anything along those lines. That's shifting to different cohorts. So we won't be able to see the individual data. Everything's going to be based on a group level. And we don't necessarily know a lot of what that means so far as the technical aspects of it. But there's a couple of things that it does tell us. So going forward, we won't be able to get the individual details. It'll be more of like we'll get a mass data entry into the Google Ads itself. So it's kind of different. Like whereas right now it's literally one-to-one. Going forward, it won't just be like a box of data that you open it up and you get to see the data. There's also going to be data missing from that box because Google is also adding different data privacy layers. Specifically, what it means is it's defaulting back to the last click for conversion attribution. So in the last year, they've really pushed different attribution styles. So they're going back to the last click attribution. It says it's 95% as effective as the current cookie-based model. We'll see what actually happens, but even at 95%, you're going to see less conversions in your Google Ads account. Really what that means is it's going to affect advertisers who spend, I'm going to say, lower than $5,000 a month in ad spend, because they won't have that information to buy all of the group data like as much. So that's really going to start affecting them. But yeah, it's basically the download. It likely will affect dynamic remarketing as well, because it's taking away that personalization of the individual user and going to groups. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with dynamic remarketing. It's probably going to be some watered down version or something new entirely.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I think remarketing is next on the list anyway.
Right.
It's sort of the top we wanted to hit. And I'm glad that you know and understand that, because I didn't understand a single piece of that. You know, like that's why we need to have guys like you. I have the basic understanding, but I appreciate the detailed explanation.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Yeah, so as far as remarketing, you know, I mean, it's a huge, I think, benefit to anybody who does, you know, any kind of marketing for any business, including higher education. I mean, you know, especially in higher education, because that's such a big decision, right? So remarketing, for those who might not know, is, you know, basically the ad following you around after you visit somebody's page. And it could be done in many different ways. And I'm sure Mark could spend hours explaining how that works as well. But it's so valuable to higher education because they don't make that decision on the first visit to Bloomsburg University, right? So you want them to be following around so that it's always top of mind as they navigate to their social channels. And there's some interesting statistics that we found, again, as we were researching for this topic. You know, the average click-through rate for a display ad is 0.07%. However, the click-through rate for a remarketed ad is 0.7%. So 10 times higher than a display ad. So you could see the value right then and there for anybody using remarketing. And I think, Matt, you were even talking a little bit about it. I mean, can you go in a little bit deeper on how you use remarketing to target, you know, and you even mentioned not just prospective students, but their parents.
Right. And I have a follow-up question for Mark, if I could, at the end of this, because it's something that I've been thinking about, and the impact of where this is going to go with Flock and remarketing. But we are remarketing. We're remarketing in Google. We're remarketing in Bing. However, the one thing I'll say about our remarketing is that we're doing that through a vendor. That's not something that I manage in-house, although I mean, I would love to, Sean knows, I would love to manage all of this in-house, because this is who I am and this is what I do. There's value in remarketing, right? It's always like, if you're not doing this, you need to start doing this now. It's always one of those things that you read that you need to be doing, and if not, you're doing it wrong. My follow-up question for Mark is, if Flock is going to group into cohorts, is a cohort going to include 16, 15, 16, 17, and 18-year-olds, prospective undergraduate students? And will we be allowed to remarket to that cohort because of privacy? Because right now, if you're in Google, you can't get data on that age group. So is it going to impact our ability to remarket to that age group if we can't get data? I'm just taking it a step further and wondering if we're going to be able to remarket to them. In the old way, we have a cookie on their computer and we can do it. But now, for dependent on a cohort, I'm just wondering what the impact is. Have you seen anything about that? Do you have any insight into that?
So there's still a lot of information that needs to come out. This is basically kind of, for one of the first times, it's kind of like the paid department is almost like the SEO department when there's a Google update and we have to figure out, all right, now they made this update. Now what's it actually mean and how does it affect the campaigns? The example that Google was giving is, if there's 5 different or maybe 6 different people who go to the site, then you know there's a couple of ways that they could group them. They could group them in, okay, these 3 people went to site xyz.com, and that's one way to group them. And then the second way to group them is, okay, these people have interest based. Maybe they're interested in like motorcycles, or maybe they're interested in cars, and we could group them in that way. from what it sounds like, it's going to be a combination of everything, and they're really valuing the privacy. So until it actually rolls out, until we could start throwing some money behind it and seeing what actually plays out, I think there's a lot up in the air until we get that information.
Mhm.
You know, it makes sense that, Matt, to your point earlier, one thing that higher ed really has an advantage in to traditional retail or others is that we have the ability to buy exclusive data from the College Board. And so when he talks about addressable data, that truly is something where the list match with all of our advertising becomes critically important. And it also really adds a little bit more pressure on our CRMs to be able to do their work really well in that cross-functional attribution.
That's Jen, that's why for me, first party data is going to be so critical going forward, because Mark's right. We don't know a lot about Flock and how this is going to all play out, but I know how the data in my CRM is going to play out. So I'd rather bank on that than whatever these changes are going to be coming out with.
Exactly. Although I will tell you that the fact that the College Board has postponed SAT tests and more schools are going SAT optional has the potential to impact that a little bit in the traditional ways. But I'm sure they'll find a way to connect us to those students in some way, shape, or form.
So, Jennifer, we'll stick with you. We asked Matt about his remarketing. He mentioned he outsources that. Could you talk a little bit about, how you handle it? And I'll add a question onto the end of that about A/B testing. If you are doing remarketing, are you doing any A/B testing as well?
Always. That's the answer. Mostly, it really helps us to better understand what's impactful and important to our audience. So we often do ABC testing, if not even more versions. So it does give us some better insight as to what headlines are making an impact, what photos are making an impact. So that's always critically important as we look at our creative refreshes. We do work with a digital agency, and to Matt's point, there's only so much that our internal teams have the bandwidth to support, and being able to make bid adjustments on the fly and really focus on making the analytics work for us by doing so is really an important thing that we utilize a partner for.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that remarketing is funny for me, because for the longest time before I was involved in the digital world to any degree, it was like magic. Like I would swear like all these things would read my mind, and these ads would pop in, not really understanding how that process worked. But it makes me wonder. I think there's a question around ad frequency and ad fatigue, and the pros and cons around retargeting. So maybe Shane, like what are your thoughts from a maybe you can address a little bit about what you're doing from a paid side, but then how do you take ad fatigue and ad frequency? Do you take those things into consideration as part of your strategy?
Yeah, I do. So we also work with an agency as well, but one of my biggest philosophies about ad fatigue is while I'm digital first 95% of the time, I also see the value in a mailer to the home, a billboard, a print ad, anything that's going to kind of draw an eye away from the screen, but also then relate to what they were seeing on their screen. So if I pass a billboard driving down the highway, odds are I'm not going to interact with that billboard on the spot. But if I see an ad later based on my location, based on my demographics, that's the same creative, maybe a different message. I might be more likely to interact with that if I'm truly somebody interested in that school. So when it comes to ad fatigue, it's tough to find a mix. We try really hard to obviously get in front of as many people as we can with our paid strategy, but then also supplement that based on audience with direct mailers and things like that. And then also once we get students on campus for, let's say, when we're able to do campus tours, making sure they see the same things they saw in those ads, but in a different format. So it could be posters on campus, it could be a handout. So it's always at the back of my mind and front of my mind most of the time when deciding the right mix is I know I get fatigued by seeing the same ad over and over and over and over. So I would imagine a 15 to 18-year-old would be the same way.
It's amazing. And I have to say, I have to appreciate this because now Jen and Shane, we're going to get Matt to do it before this is over, has admitted the importance of print. I'm a 20-year, print veteran. Is that a word? Can I say it? I'm a 20-year print rookie, but I'm out here a lot, really advocating for that as well. And I see there's big opportunities for integrating print and digital campaigns, and I think a lot of what Shane said kind of alluded to that. And I will say, from the print's perspective of things, a lot of institutions aren't really taking advantage of that. And I don't necessarily mean higher ed. I'm talking just from a general perspective. There's opportunity with print and digital integration, for all of the reasons that Shane had mentioned and then some, that I think it's really an opportunity that's being missed. I put together a piece of content about has print become a purple cow? Because we've seen marketing dollars start to shift away from those traditional things and more into digital for a lot of reasons, right? Measurability, right? Some of those things, it's harder to do that in the print world. But when less and less people are being served messages via that medium, right? It's certainly an important piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if I could just add on to that, when I think about print, I think about it's a less intimidating way to get somebody where I want them to go. And I think about parents specifically. If I'm sending somebody a postcard to their home with, some information, but not an overwhelming amount of information and not something that I think is, my Alexa is going to be listening to me because I clicked on it. It's an easier, less scary way to get somebody that might not be used to interacting with the digital ad space. It's an easier way for me to kind of get them in the door and see the information I want them to see.
Sure.
I also like to think about it by way of, with so much digital now, especially due to COVID, that we have the chance to take an opportunity to make something tactile. Mm-hmm. And so that's a critically important piece to this. If we can put something together in an unusual shape or that folds a little bit funny, just to give somebody something to do with their hands besides this, is really an important piece to engagement for us.
Absolutely. And one thing I'll say, because I know we want to get into a little bit about core web vitals, and we're just trying to be conscious of your time. You guys, we appreciate it. And I'm totally going to lose my train of thought here. Oh, no, I got it back. Okay. So what the interesting thing too is when we talk about the importance of like search engine optimization, right? Obviously a big time, it's a digital topic, right? If 50% or more of the digital conversation, but the role that direct mail can play in that, that the statistics show that 60% of people that are served up a piece of direct mail visit that website as a result of it, right? So if you're looking to drive traffic and you want people to get to your website, direct mail is an option for that. If the post office would maybe bring the postage rate down, we could do a little better job with that. But that's a topic for another day. I digress.
But not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but can't you also tell when they're going to receive that?
You can. So the post office has a number of what they call digital services. Some of them, in truth, I don't find valuable. So some of them are. They do have an opportunity where they will actually send you what equates to a photograph of the piece of mail that's coming to your mailbox. It basically says, "Hey, here's what's going to hit your mailbox." Those measures, I don't see a lot of value in. You're basically doubling down on the same message. Hey, you're gonna get this tangible. I'd rather somebody's first impression be when it hits the mailbox, and then have the digital experience to follow. But yeah, the post office is trying to find ways to bring digital in, but truthfully, the digital integration that I see comes more from the internal marketing teams that find ways to bring them together. Right. So whether you're you're taking an ad campaign in search and social, you're delivering the same message in a mailbox, you're retargeting then on that same message, and driving it home. There's ways to do it that's effective. I think the post office is trying to get there, but I don't think they have perfected that product set just yet.
Okay, great. Thank you. So as you mentioned, let's get into the Core Web Vitals.
Yeah.
We know that in May, Google's finally telling us that they're going to have an update.
Yeah,
And it's
a heads up.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And we can all start preparing for it. And that involves the Core Web Vitals, or, the speed of your page. And so let's bring back our expert, Mark Diamond, to talk a little bit about the Core Web Vitals, what they are, what they mean to us.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. So yeah, this is something that Google told us about last year. So they've given us a lot of time to prepare for this specific update. That's very unusual with Google. So obviously it's something important. It's going to have a lot of meaning to it. So what the Web Core Vitals essentially means, it boils down into, there's three things you have to do. The three metrics it's really looking at. The first is the largest contentful paint. That measures the speed at which the page's main content is loaded. That should be 2.5 seconds or faster. The second metric it's looking at is first input delay. This measures the speed at which the users are able to interact with the page after landing on it. Obviously, you want that to be really fast, otherwise people are going to back out and bounce. The third metric it's looking at is the layout shift. So that really measures how often users experience unexpected layout shifts, and that shouldn't happen. They should have a nice cohesive experience on the page itself. The cool part about the Core Web Vitals, Google was discussing actually putting like a badge on the SERPs if someone gets all three of them, and that's kind of going to be a huge ranking factor going forward, having all three of these things on your website, making sure that the website is fast and there's a good user experience. That's ultimately what they're after. There hasn't been any definitive thing on the badge yet, but that is something that I know that they were experimenting with at the end of last year. That would be really cool if that did actually appear. It'd be very interesting, because if the websites that don't have badges, like, I assume they're going to get less clicks, right? So it'd be something that is very meaningful for companies to make sure that their website is doing.
Okay. All right. So real quick, we'll just turn back to the panel quick. I'll just, Shane, real quick, Core Web Vitals, has your department, your higher education institution considered any of these metrics?
Yeah, we do. In fact, when we work with our agency to create new pages or marketing pages, I don't even look at them in desktop view half the time. I look at them on my phone. I shrink them down to mobile view, and make sure we're trying to hit all of those points you just mentioned, because I mean that's the majority of our traffic is from mobile. If we're serving them an ad on their phone or their social media, of course we want the page that they're going to look good to them on a phone. So, just dating back to when I first started here, looking at things like form placement, looking at image size, content on there, keyword saturation, things like that. But these metrics are really interesting. And as we move forward in updating our website, it's definitely going to be something that we pay close attention to. My web administrator here is really, really good and talented. So that's an exciting change to look at.
Absolutely. I know a lot of people we're working on it as well here locally. I'm going to swing it over to Matt. Seems like we're speed dating quickly. No, but Matt, Shane brought up the mobile experience. Obviously, we know, that the demographic you're going after spends a lot of time on their mobile phones. Can you talk about the impact to the mobile experience that Shane kind of alluded to?
Yeah, so when we redesigned our website, it's about 2 years ago now, we focused on mobile first design. So it scrolls. When you look on our website on a desktop computer, you don't see the block layout. It essentially scrolls top to bottom, which is a little bit of a frustration, because when individuals are sitting and looking at it and making suggestions here internally, they're not thinking what the user is seeing. So we we've been very purposeful about making sure that our website is designed for mobile first. But what interests me most about Core Web Vitals is that this reminds me so much of GDPR, in that we've been notified, we've been told about this, we've had months leading up to it. And the sense that I have is that most businesses don't know about this. And taking that a step further, if most businesses don't know about this, my guess is most in higher education don't know about this. And I think it's going to come as a shock. We have work to do, but listening to what Shane said, I think that this is even going to go past having work to do. I think that this is going to be revamping processes, because you need to have a process in place to make sure that your images are properly sized, 72 DPI, and can load quickly. You're going to need to have processes in place to make sure that your pages are going to hit this. And so knowing about this update may not be enough. It's knowing how you're going to handle this, not for that date when this starts, but going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. I think it's a lot of things. I think it is certainly something that a lot of organizations are going to be not prepared for.
Right. We were even talking about it. You might be a little bit behind if you're just the first
Yeah,
time
right. If you're hearing about it
Yeah.
now, like, you know, especially for listeners, like if people are listening to this and they're like, "Oh, Core Web Vitals," if that's the reaction, like you said, they're a little bit behind. It's certainly not too late, but you know, it's time to really take action.
Right. So
Without a
quick-
doubt.
swing it over to Jennifer, and you talk a little bit about mobile first, Core Web Vitals. Anything to add?
Yeah, honest to goodness, as we have been looking at building our new website, it's mobile always. It has to work that way. And we're reminding our partners across campus that the reason that we recommend either site structure or content details the way we do is for that very reason. One thing I would add, though, is looking at some of the tools and resources that we've put into the web over the last couple of years. Site Improve is one of those elements that really helps us to better understand page load. It also gives us the true heat map of how people are navigating our site. To Matt's point, a lot of times mobile sites can have just a death scroll, if you will. And so it's important for us to be able to know that people are reaching the content that they need. It gives us the chance to assess the volume of broken links and the cross references that we often have to make with content to make sure that we can not only attack SEO from the keyword standpoint, but the site content and linkability as well. So that's been a really important tool that we've put into place, and the vital statistics about page load, we've actually already made some significant changes. One of those being that our cookie notification was one of those delays in page load that was affecting that. So it's been a really helpful thing to have in place, and even more so going into more of these changes.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
it's
you very
amazing.
much.
It's insightful. I mean, it's interesting too. Like I love hearing about Site Improve. And I think that's one thing that is a huge advantage is I do think there are some really incredible tools available, to institutions to measure these things. And I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on it because I know we're getting close on time. In fact, we may be even getting close to wrapping up.
We are getting close. So, when we first started this podcast, this series, this was going to be both paid and SEO. And you could see, I think it's like 56 minutes into it, and we've only covered paid.
Yeah.
So
a little bit of paid.
Yeah. And so with our next episode, we really want to get into some SEO. So at this point, I'd like to even throw it back to the panel. And I think we'll start with Jennifer on this one. What is the one most important SEO consideration you have for 2021?
I was afraid you were going to ask me to go first. I was looking for my notes to make sure that I could touch on that. But honestly, a lot of it is keyword based, making sure that we're also making use of the new site that we're building. That's a huge piece of the functionality that really necessitated the move, so that we can attach UTM parameters to everything, so that we can see performance through Google Analytics, but even more importantly, tying it to the SEO and SEM parts of our advertising strategy. So
Great.
Awesome.
Great.
Yeah.
And Shane?
Yeah, for me, it's honestly improving at SEO as a whole. And one of my goals is to, we have a quarterly magazine here. And one of my goals is to kind of turn that into a blog news site, so to speak, and sort of develop a pipeline of, some of our faculty are subject matter experts in their areas, and a pipeline of that content that we can tie to the programs and the semesters we're advertising. But honestly, SEO improvement as a whole is my biggest priority. That might sound like a non-answer, but it's the truth. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it's a not answer at all. Makes a lot of sense.
All right. And over to Matt for the last.
Yeah, so I don't like that you're limiting this to one priority. But when I look at SEO, right, it's
you can give us two, Matt.
Well, I was going to do three.
Go ahead, go for it.
So when I look at SEO, it's a combination of content, UX, and technical. And if I had to pick one of those, and I think that this encompasses both content and technical, it's going to be user experience. So when we think back to core web vitals and page speed, that's user experience. When we think about relevant content, that's user experience. And that's all going to help to elevate my SEO. The next big project that I'm going to work on from an SEO perspective, in addition to core web vitals, is we're going to be looking at implementing schema. So SEO is something front and center on my list. And I just made this analogy the other day, and I hope this is an appropriate analogy, but paid is like, a fling, right? It's a fling with someone that you're dating. SEO is like a marriage, and you got to work at it. And that's the mentality that I'm taking going forward with SEO, is it's something that we really have to work on to get the most ROI out of it.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. SEO is absolutely the long-term play, and it's forever changing. It's a constant project. No, it's a good analogy, man. I would agree with you. And what I would say, I know you want to wrap things up, and I would just like to say to these guys, number one, thank you so much for taking the time this morning. I know we had a little bit of a technical difficulty and a delay, and I hope we didn't inconvenience you with that. And if we did, just say that we didn't, so it made me feel better. But thank you guys for your time. And look, we're going to continue to have these, and we're going to continue to have these conversations. We're going to dive deeper into some of these issues, and we'll keep you guys as panelists up to speed on what's upcoming. And if you say, hey, I'd like to jump in on that conversation, we would love to have you. Because this is so important to talk about these things, and your continued participation would be great. Would be really appreciated.
Yes,
well, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. This was wonderful. Thank you, Sean, for inviting me.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
No, appreciate you guys. Jeff?
Yeah. And in closing, like we said in the beginning, if you're looking for any more information on any of our panelists, that's on our website. We have their full bios up there. You can learn more about them and how their involvement is. Hopefully, you learned a little something here. Found out a little bit more than what you did before. I think Prospected, because they called Mark and said, what are core web vitals? So he had to go take a phone
he had
call.
to leave.
So thanks again for everybody. Thank you, Sean, for helping me put this together. And also look forward to more episodes involving higher education, digital marketing. And the next one is specifically about SEO. March 4th is when we'll be
recording
about that.
We'll be talking about that.
So,
right.
So make sure you tune in for that. We'll make sure that you're aware of it before it airs. And thank you again for tuning in to Beyond Local.